So, welcome everybody. My name is Nicola Zingales. I'm a professor at FGV Law School in Rio de Janeiro, and I'm one of the directors of CPDP LATAM. So this session really tries to make a link between CPDP and this sister conference that we are holding every year in Rio de Janeiro. We are trying to bring in voices from Latin America. I'm very happy to see many of you here. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers, one per each jurisdiction that is developing a very interesting framework on artificial intelligence, and not just regulation of artificial intelligence, but also a vision for artificial intelligence in the region. So this panel is precisely going to discuss what are the approaches that are being taken in these 4 leading jurisdictions, and whether we can build bridges, what we can learn from these experiences. Next to me, we have Luz Orozco, who is a researcher and PhD candidate at the law school in Oxford. Then we have Pablo Trigo, who is a researcher at VUB, so here in Brussels. Then we have Beatriz Botero Avila, who is a professor. She's a professor at Sciences Po in Paris. And then Beatriz Kira, who is a lecturer in law at Sussex University. And so the countries will be Mexico, Chile, Colombia, and Brazil. We'll start from Luz, to my right. And if we can play the first set of slides. We have, yes, perfect. This is on Mexico. So, Luz, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. It is a great pleasure to be here. And I would like to begin by thanking Professor Nicola Zingales for his kind invitation to participate in this panel. My objective is to offer a snapshot of where Mexico is at the race to regulate AI, particularly in context of Latin America and the Caribbean. I will address 3 aspects. First, the fact that Mexico has no published national AI strategy, which makes a country an outlier in this panel. And I think this is already telling. Secondly, and despite the previous point, Mexico has a maturing but solid AI ecosystem. I will highlight some of the strengths and challenges that we are currently facing to sketch some strategic areas. Thirdly, I will address the legal dimension. In this sense, I would like to push back a bit on the title of the panel. My claim is that since currently we are more adopters and users of AI rather than deployers, regulation remains a crucial strategic tool in order to shape these technologies according to our context, instead of trying to align with them. Of course, becoming developers rather than adopters should be central in our long-term strategy. So, I guess this goes like this.
I think it's the green one. Oh, okay.
Is it?
Can we move this up?
Yes. No, thank you. Thanks. So as I said, the Mexican government has not published its national AI strategy. However, in 2018, there was a relevant multi-stakeholder initiative, which included a wide consultation and the publication of general principles. This initiative was actually endorsed by the Mexican government, and it became Latin America's first draft of country's policy regarding AI. However, with the change of administration, this initiative was largely put on hold. This showcases one of the main problems in the region, the policy discontinuity between administrations and the difficulties of implementing long-term strategies. However, what makes the case of Mexico particularly interesting is that this has not stopped the conversation from going. Important catalyzers have been the National Alliance for AI, fueled by the Senate and UNESCO. The results of this multi-stakeholder initiative were actually published just last week, and they include specific recommendations regarding policy and regulatory measures. The bills proposed at Congress at the federal level, I think they have also sparked some conversation. And here it's important to note the work of NGOs following the process. Relevant initiatives in local governments include Querétaro, Yucatán, and Jalisco, and the UNESCO's RAM is in process. As in the case of Chile, I'm sure this will help Mexico establish more detailed roadmap for policy and regulation. Numbers indicate that Mexico has an ecosystem that, while is still maturing, I would say that is definitely solid in the region. This should come as no surprise because we are the second largest economy behind Brazil, and because our geographical proximity to the US. Across the indexes and benchmarks, Mexico performs respectably well. Mexico scores in the top half of countries worldwide on network readiness, digital adoption, government AI readiness, GovTech maturity, and global cybersecurity. This all indicates a reasonable innovation environment with, of course, some areas of opportunity. I would say that the perhaps more critical is the automation readiness. The public sector has implemented several AI tools in healthcare, tax investigations, anti-corruption, and national security. But I want to raise a red flag here. It is well known that the Mexican government uses facial recognition technology and biometric systems to monitor public spaces and border control. This implementation raises, of course, several human rights concerns and is particularly troubling given our long history of persecuting dissidents and journalists. Hopefully we can discuss these regional concerns in the Q&A. Finally, startups in Mexico have widely implemented AI as well, including health, retail, food and agricultural sectors. Unsurprisingly, fintech is a field that shows more development. In terms of the incentives and mechanisms to develop this ecosystem, Mexico is a country of contrasts. We are a very unequal society with significant social, gender, and regional gaps. So how to make AI technologies work for everybody while taking care of the environment is not quite evident. Concrete examples of this complexity are the social conflicts around the operation of data centers and their water consumption that exploded last year in Querétaro. So here are some of the contrasts. Mexico has commercial 5G, but around 20% of the population does not have internet access. We are second place in the registration of AI patents in the region. Undergraduate and graduate programs offerings on AI are extensive, and we have 4 active research centers working specifically on AI. However, digital literacy, and I'm understanding here digital literacy in a very broad term, and developing a skilled workforce remain crucial concerns. I think it's worth mentioning that we have a functioning open data portal where more than 200 public institutions share their data sets. However, we are far behind in open source productivity and national standardization. Finally, the buzzword in Mexico is nearshoring due to the country's strategic location. However, this would require infrastructure on data processing and capacity building. So against this backdrop, I would say that one of the key challenges is how we translate this public fund into private investment and social welfare while taking care of the environment. So just to finish, I'll go back. The legal dimension. So there is no omnibus or general law in Mexico. However, some legal statutes have specific provisions regarding consumer protection, data protection, competition law. Particularly the fintech law, I would say, has even more development. It provides some obligations, some financial institutions to disclose to users some of their operations. Think about evaluation of credit scores and the identification of frauds. And also we have 5 key regulatory agencies that would be in a position to address AI-related harms. However, there are no significant actions so far regarding the imposition of fines or sanctions for AI-related matters. So going to what is on the table in the Congress right now. There are at least 31 initiatives in Congress, most of them concerning cybercrime, deepfakes, medical procedures, and only 2 have an omnibus approach. Last February, one of these omnibus bills was presented in Congress, and it is, I wouldn't say a copy-paste, but it's greatly inspired by the Europeans' approach in the AI Act, and a little bit of Chile as well. I would argue that we should look at this transplant with caution. This, of course, does not mean that we cannot get valuable insights from the EU AI Act. It just means that we should avoid hasty transpositions. And because of time, I will only enunciate 2 of my concerns, one regarding the European specific context and one regarding the Mexican context. So regarding the European Union, first of all, the AI Act is a product safety framework intended to function as a harmonization legislation for 27 countries. While the final text emphasizes the protection of fundamental rights, it was not designed taking a human rights approach from the outset. I think we should keep an eye on this for our region. Also, the AI Act is designed to operate within the EU's extensive digital regulatory experience and institutional capacity. This means a consolidated data protection framework, digital service and market package, and up-to-date copyright directive. Importantly, the EU has a high level of standardization, I cannot say the same regarding my country, and relies on national authorities for its enforcement. There is not one single agency that deals with infringements, so the risk of one authority being overwhelmed by cases is relatively low. So looking closer to the Mexican context, and please allow me, I will reduce complexity, but I just want to highlight three examples that I think we should keep an eye on them. One is remedies, surveillance, and research. So the AI Act has a remedy section that definitely would not be enough in the Mexican reality. We need much more emphasis on the channels of contestation and redress. AI technologies are all about powers asymmetries, and any legislation should try to rebalance that situation, taking into account our structural obstacles in the access to justice. As an emerging democracy, dealing with the past of authoritarianism, Mexico needs to be especially vigilant in terms of the restrictions and safeguards against surveillance technologies. Facial recognition, biometric systems, even if in the European Union, it is at least arguable that there are overbroad exemptions to certain bans, I think in the Mexican context, we should take a second look at this. So finally, very quickly, I think I'm running out of time, we also need to be cautious about the balancing between intellectual property rights and the right to research and access to knowledge. We need to openly discuss how to include an exemption for research when banning text and data mining to avoid exposing researchers to legal risks. And in that sense, I think Brazil would probably, I think according to my knowledge, you guys have an exemption regarding that. So, going forward, yes, 2 minutes? No. Okay. Okay, going forward, I'm wrapping up. So in contrast with 2018, I think we have now strong ethical references. I'm thinking about UNESCO's and OECD work, which is now on the table. That was not the case a couple of years ago. So I think they should be socialized and internalized. We have now an interesting and comprehensive multi-stakeholder proposal from the National Alliance that I mentioned earlier. And we are having national elections next week, so I think there's a window of opportunity to discuss these issues. I would say the regulatory transplant of the AU Act warrants careful attention. Before or even alongside an omnibus approach, I think we need a sectorial updating on data protection, intellectual property, cybersecurity, competition law, and also civil damages. This includes strengthening the oversight and investigatory powers of existing regulatory agencies. And of course, this requires resources. So, for the region, a path forward would be to work on the interoperability of governance efforts. So ideally, and this will be interesting to discuss in the Q&A, we should act as a bloc, as a regional bloc. I would like to end with a note of caution. Although everything around us makes us feel that we're in a hurry, we should not forget that we are still in a stage of experimentation. So I would be skeptical of identifying better practices yet. So what is certain is that this is a challenge that we would like to tackle as a region rather than individually. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. You ended on a perfect note, saying that we need to act together. But I think you mentioned a number of important points that are common and concerns in the region. So, for example, the use of artificial intelligence in the public sector for law enforcement purposes, the inequalities that characterize these countries, and the importance of multi-stakeholder initiatives that make sure that there is a more participatory approach to developing the policies on AI. I think this is some common thread that we can explore. But now, let's move on to another jurisdiction that is developing very interesting approaches, and that is Colombia. We have another set of slides. If you could please show. Yes, they are available. So Beatriz, one, you have the
This
floor.
works? Yes. This works? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Nicolo, for organizing this panel, and it's really an honor to be sitting here with you. And thank you for being here for the last panel of the day. Just to get a sense of the audience, who's not Latin American from the people sitting here? Okay. Okay. A couple. Okay. Excellent. That gives me a sense, sort of who we're talking to. Okay, so AI in Colombia. I went a little bit creative with my slides. The art is from a guy called Antonio Caro, and that's like an interesting, whatever, you see it. IP lawyers might be having a special moment right now. I'm not an IP lawyer. So to begin, I thought I'd give you some context about Colombia in a similar way of what Luz tried to do. I think one of the things that I want to argue about a country like Colombia is that we are not like Mexico and Brazil, and that poses different challenges. So to give you a sense, for those of you who aren't Latin American, Colombia is about the size, the economic size of Romania and the Czech Republic. We have a population of 50 million people, 43rd country in the GDP ranking. The World Bank calls that an upper middle income country. That means we don't get special loans anymore, but we are still not very developed, a complicated situation. Our Gini is very high. It's in the top 10 of the world, a little bit lower than the Brazilian one. And then, yes, the Gini is a very complicated metric, but it just means we're a very unequal society. About 50% of people in Colombia work in the informal economy. Our education system could improve significantly. We are significantly below the PISA, the OECD average of PISA. And something that I will make the case is very important. We have a very strong constitutional tradition. So Colombia has had a complicated history, continues to have a complicated present. But one of the things one of the good things that has left us with is a very strong constitutional court, a very strong Bill of Rights, a court that's progressive, that interprets the charter broadly. And so I'm going to try to argue that some of the things that we worry about in the world of AI, like AI discrimination, have procedural challenges, but they don't have judicial challenges because that will fall in court. And I will give you examples of cases in which that has happened. I'll give you a little bit about our tech landscape. I thought I would add this later after I had submitted my slides, but also to give you a sense of how different a country like Colombia is in Latin America vis-a-vis Brazil and Mexico. It's more like Chile, actually, and maybe more like Peru. Latin America has about 26 unicorns. Of those 26 unicorns, 21 are from Mexico and Brazil. One is Argentinian. One is, in the list that I saw, 2 are Colombian, but I disagree with one. It's not really a tech company. And another one is Chilean. So our tech ecosystem is significantly less developed at an economic level, and I would argue that's something that we need to focus on. According to the Government AI Readiness Index that I also looked at, we're 4th place in LATAM. We have relatively good connectivity. 53rd globally, so kind of like an average country. The software and AI industry currently employs about 370,000 people. I thought that was a very interesting number. We have a couple of very good universities that are technical universities, and so you see a market rising of software engineers that code in Colombia for the rest of the world. So it employs 1.5% of the population, which I don't think is insignificant. What else should I say? It has a relatively vibrant ecosystem in 2 cities, in Medellin and Bogota, and that has increased 30% in the last 2-3 years. So it's moving and it's vibrating, but I want to say it's still small. So I was telling you about the Constitution. So currently, just to give you a landscape of what's happening, and then I'll comment a little bit more. There's 5 projects in Congress right now about AI. None of them really come from government. Some of them come from congressmen supported by the government, but none of them really seem to be aligned with a national strategy. And very similar to what we just heard happen in Mexico, Colombia was a pioneer in adopting the AI ethical principles. Once they came out of the OECD and UNESCO, we were the first country in Latin America in approving them locally. Approving them is a wrong way of putting it. The presidency of the last president issued a document, and that was quickly dropped when the government changed. So there is a challenge of technological, of policy continuity. And so if we were going to do something, it would be interesting to do it at the legislative level, but there seems to be very little Congress and planning around that. The 5 projects that I'm mentioning, for example, don't necessarily agree on what they mean by AI, and that's been part of the conversation. That was a challenge in Europe as well, but that's where we are. We do have, however, a couple of administrative soft law. That's a type of document that's common in our tradition, where a central agency issues guidelines for other administrative agency. Those have been around for a couple of years. They're very good. I think they're very solid, but it's unclear how much they're being operationalized, again, by government. And we have had some instances in which we've tried to adopt like innovation sandboxes and for AI and privacy. They don't seem to have had many experiments happening within them. Unlike, for example, in the fintech sector, which is also a very strong sector where the fintech, the sandbox fintech has had very interesting experiments, I'd say, but AI, not related to AI. About the adoption of AI in government, there's a couple of large examples. One of the things that I see happening in Colombia as elsewhere is that we want to call everything AI, and so the moment people have a relatively large spreadsheet, they start calling it AI, and it's unclear what anyone means by it. There are some applications of machine learning in all sorts of policy making, as always, and so that's sort of one of my first questions. I have more questions about this than I have answers, I'm sorry. Is exactly what we mean when we're talking about AI in a country like Colombia. But there's large examples of what we would actually call like potentially complicated AI. We have the National Tax Agency has a very large model to try to identify people who may be evading taxes. The Anti-Corruption Agency has a system called Ocean that's also pretty impressive. And there's this example of the General Attorney's Office. They had something called Prisma, and Prisma was supposed to help the General Attorney's Office prioritize cases. So Colombia, like many countries in the Global South, has a problem of congestion in the judicial legal system that's very significant. Like I'm a lawyer, guilty of that. And the saying in Colombia goes that a lawyer has a lifetime of 2 or 3 cases to the end, because it might take you about 8 years to take a case to its furthest conclusion to the highest court. And so the General Attorney's Office wanted to, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes in my phone. The General Attorney's Office wanted to have like the system that would allow it to prioritize cases, and that didn't pass the constitutional challenge or the constitutional analysis of the internal legal teams, because one of the things that they said was that the data required for this was data that would immediately trigger anti-discrimination law in the country and wouldn't go. So I think there the challenge was, so there's an instance in which the legal system, as it is, with no real need to have like an AI law, already prevented some potential risks, and maybe at a significant cost, right? Like prioritization of cases in a country like Colombia is also a public policy goal that's worthy of taking seriously. And then, besides that comment, there's some adoption in city governments. There's interesting instances of adoption for smart grids, a little bit insecurity. I've worked on this in Medellin and Bogota and Cucuta. Very little facial recognition, surprisingly and fortunately. There's some facial recognition in the stadiums, but most of those cameras don't work. A recent report by the National Statistical Office reported that about half of the CCTV cameras in the country are broken. So that's both a blessing and a curse. You might judge it. And there are very few public reported incidents of AI discrimination, the type of we've seen in the US, in Europe, in Brazil, there's a couple of incidents. We haven't really seen that in Colombia. The only incidents that are recent, and you might have seen in the news because we were pioneers in that, we had some judges using ChatGPT in judicial decision-making. ChatGPT, of course, hallucinated, and that didn't go exactly as planned. So we've now issued some guidelines about how to use ChatGPT, but we do have those. So some lessons learned so far, and I think one is that it's early for the country. We're a less developed economy. We're less in the tech world. And so one of the things that I want to invite us to have as a conversation is what's the right path when it's so early, actually, and especially when the Constitution seems to have worked so far. Of course, the challenge of regulating AI, it's its opacity, its scalability, its autonomy, but then maybe those are some of the challenges that we should be focusing on. Like if you're adopting AI, then you should have a transparency answer in mind, but I'm not sure we need a big AI rule, actually, but then I'm curious for the conversations. Similarly as before, strategies that are in law do not survive, and so if we're gonna have some sort of continuity, and if we're gonna adopt some of the documents that Luz mentioned, like the UNESCO treaty or the OECD recommendations, it seems important that that's not contingent to the government in place. And then there's no coordination approach in Congress. And then other innovation strategies haven't been working. That's a document that the CAF issued last week. For anyone interested, actually, I recommend it. It has a very good summary of what's been happening in Latin America. But I want to finish my presentation very quickly with a provocation. And so the name of the panel is AI needs a strategy and not just regulation. And one of the things that sort of thinking about this made me think about is what exactly does that strategy look like in a medium-sized country? So if you're Latin American, what does it look like? Maybe more like Peru or Chile or Colombia. And then I want to really emphasize that I think we're different than Brazil and Mexico because of the size of the economy and our like how strong the ecosystem is. And if you were doing policy in Europe, like how would you do this if it was just Romania, just the Czech Republic, and not about harmonizing the EU level? And I think a lot of that is it's thinking about what we want of AI, like the AI economy, or to do for a country like ours, like Colombia. And so I think the strategy, in a broader sense, I would focus on how does that create economic development and opportunity for a country that badly needs it. How does it create jobs, quality jobs? How do we prevent new harms from happening? But it's already a hard place to live in, and so I think there's trade-offs about efficiency and things like that that are worth looking at in places like this. I think efficient and accessible government and other services are an important thing to think about. And one of the things that I've seen happening in the global conversation is that today in Europe, in the US, certainly in China, AI is industrial policy. It's not only about human rights, and it's also a heavy regulated industry. But if we're thinking about industrial policy for the future, I think the question that I have is how does that look like in a medium-sized country? But then for that, I'm looking for a further conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beatriz. Interesting to end with a provocation, but also I think you have a pessimistic view of strategies if they are not embedded into a law, which is something to consider for our conversation. I think also another point that you mentioned is maybe we don't need to have something like the EU AI Act, necessarily something broad, comprehensive. We can make piecemeal approach and change existing law, or maybe some of the existing law are sufficient to deal with aspects of AI. So that's something to consider. Maybe we don't need to put together industrial policy, human rights, everything into the same package as, for example, the EU AI Act does. And I think also Luz mentioned something to that extent. We need amendments, but let's think about it. Maybe we don't need like a full comprehensive strategy. In fact, in Brazil, there is a division between the EU, the AI regulation and the AI strategy. However, so far it has remained the strategy merely principiological. They recognize these ethical principles and need to build capacity building and so on, but there is not really a clear vision for the AI strategy. So maybe I think it's a good moment to pass over to Beatriz Kira, who can illuminate us on the developments on the Brazilian front.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. And clearly, Beatriz is a very common, beautiful name in Latin America, so I have two on this panel alone. Very happy to be here and sharing the panel with my colleagues here, and thank you, Nicola, and the organizers for the invitation. I think and a lot of what Nicola said and Beatriz said in terms of choices and how to develop a coherent strategy and whether or not a bill or some comprehensive legislation is part of it, and what would be the relationship between the two is something that Brazil is lively experiencing now. And I just wanted to start with some kind of data from when the Brazilian strategy was first developed. So the Brazilian National AI Strategy, or in Portuguese, Estratégia Brasileira de Inteligência Artificial, EBIA-AI, is from 2021. And there is data from the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee that maps adoption of AI technologies in the country from around that period. So we can see that in terms of enterprises, so companies, 13% of Brazilian companies that were part of the survey reported to be using some form of AI application, but the adoption was highly skewed toward large enterprises. So 39% of the largest companies had some kind of AI use at the time in terms of as part of this 13%. And in most cases, the companies are not using AIs for very sophisticated processing, and also was not the case of natural language generation or speech recognition, that again, 2021. In 73% of the cases, the companies reported being using AI as part of automations of processes and workflows, and I think that links back to what other Beatriz was saying just now, that not all AI is created the same, and what you mean by AI might differ considerably between different companies, and again, this is self-reported data. And this is not only true, and it's likely that the adoption has increased since the survey in 2021, but the public sector has also been adopting AI across different areas. So the same survey in terms of adoption of AI by the public sector, identifying that almost half of the surveyed bodies, 45% of federal and 22% of state organizations, had been using some form of AI technology. And the largest proportion of use was in the judiciary section, actually, followed by the public prosecutor office and then legislative branches. And there's also, I think it's concerning that a large proportion of the users of AI at the time in 2021, and again, the strategy had just been produced and there was no comprehensive legislation at the time. In 32% of the cases, AI or machine learning were being used for data prediction and analysis. Whatever that means is a bit unclear, but there is also data from civil society organizations that, for example, identifies that the 47 cases of facial recognition technologies, AI technologies being used in Brazil, and that has been growing. I think the data is from Igarapé Institute, and the use has been growing since 2011, and mass events such as Carnival or football matches have been cases of facial recognition technologies being used, and also in the subway, this paradigmatic case in Brazil. So that is to say that since at least 2011, AI technologies have been widely used across both the private and the public sector. There are numbers mapping the adoption. And it was only in 2021 that the Brazilian strategy was first published, and as part of the commitments, again, with the same OECD principles that were mentioned before, Brazil also committed to the principles, but also to developing a legislation, some kind of comprehensive AI bill that would not only develop a strategy, but again, maybe the other way around in terms of the panel, but also a legislation. And several different bills have been introduced to Congress since 2019. Some of them more detailed than others, but there's also a push from the government, but also from sectors of the judiciary to prioritize one or other strategies. So in 2022, a commission of jurists or legal scholars and legal practitioners was established with the goal of drafting a comprehensive and very inclusive legislation or proposal for regulation of AI in Brazil. And that committee that was kind of led by a minister of the Superior Court of Justice in Brazil proposed and introduced and developed after many public consultations and interactions with different sectors of society, a new version of the bill that is now in Parliament, and that's Bill 2338 of 2023. And very recently, so this is very fresh news, a new version of that bill, after has been again through different rounds of discussions and more public hearings, and the government has actually been very engaged in the process of redrafting the version of the bill that is currently being considered. A new bill is on the table. We call it like a replacement bill, or substitutivo is the word in Portuguese. And I think there are different elements of the bill that I could highlight and emphasize here today. And I think one question that remains is whether or not how and to what extent it has been connected to actually advancing the principles of the strategy in the moment that the Brazilian strategy for AI is also being revisited. And it could be more of an external perception, but my interpretation is that the process have not been entirely conducted in a harmonized fashion. I think there's a sense that the development of the bill on the one hand and the development of the strategy on the other have been following kind of a parallel tracks, even though there is government buy-in in both areas. Just some kind of very key highlights of the bill, and I'm happy to develop the specifics in the Q&A, but one of the kind of hallmarks of this new version is that that is being proposed is the establishment of a system of governance for AI. So the idea is kind of a mix of the EU approach of an AI office with the kind of US approach of having a decentralized enforcement, where in the Brazilian system there will be some kind of coordinator agency, could be perhaps the data protection agency, but each sector regulator would also have some kind of overseeing or supervisory capacity across different sectors. So that's one element. The principles and the rights of the bill protect, or seeks to protect, is also another key element. And then just going to the very last part of the bill, that is the whole chapter on innovation and fostering innovation and really promoting an ecosystem of AI and technology development in Brazil through different forms of R&D, research and development, lines of funding and support. Again, it isn't clear whether and to what extent that matches with the strategy. And again, as I mentioned, the strategy is being redeveloped and redesigned, also considering that Brazil is now chairing the G20 this year, and AI has been identified as one of the priorities for the country and for that presidency. So tying all the different goals and policy objectives together is definitely going to be a challenge. But I'm going to stop here before going into all the details of the bill to say that I think I echo what previous members of the panel have mentioned, that it is important to reflect not only on whether and how we want legislation to be, and it looks like Brazil is going through the kind of comprehensive, all-encompassing version of an AI regulation, and but also how to consider that against a wider backdrop of innovation and ecosystems of innovation that AI can foster. So is the bill going to, or regulation going to be an instrument that was going to help to pursue those goals in a kind of ethical but also rights protecting approach, or is there a risk that some kind of chilling effects could emerge from the regulation? So that's why it's very important to consider a kind of the wider scenario, how the different pieces of the puzzle are kind of going to work together. But I'm going to stop here and looking for the discussion, and very happy to go into more details in any of the points that I just mentioned.
Thank you, Beatrice. I was struck by when you mentioned that the judiciary is the sector where you have the most extensive use of AI today. I remember there was a talk by, or a manifestation in public by the president of the Supreme Court, Justice Barroso, that mentioned that he has started a conversation with Google and Facebook, I think, to develop a system that would allow to sift through cases, jurisprudence, help them in. Also, I think on the generative AI side to develop judgments and so on. And what I think is important to mention here is many times we are talking about AI that is from foreign companies, that is being contracted by governments, be it local or national, or even the judiciary. And it's not clear what are the criteria that are being used to select these partners. What is the transparency involved, in this? Was there a bidding process to be selected as one of the partners? It didn't seem like from the talk that we saw transmitted on television in Brazil. But in any case, thanks a lot. This is another very interesting overview. And now, to conclude our review of jurisdictions, I would move to Chile, who recently approved, I think, an important hallmark for AI regulation. Pablo was also involved in some of the policy making, so maybe, Pablo, you can tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you, Nicolo. Excuse me. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Fondo Saúde do Vargas, for the invitation, CPDP.ai for the invitation. It's difficult to distinguish sometimes, who is making these invitations when coming from LATAM, but thank you very much for bringing this topic on the floor. And yes, Chile has a nice AI policy, strategy, roadmap, blueprint. We are discussing an AI law, yes, following the EU AI Act, that's nice, but we don't have data governance law. We don't have a proper data protection law, and that's a major problem. We have a data protection law that's was enacted in 1999. It's based in principles developed in the 80s, and of course it's not adequate for dealing with the new challenges that, in terms of data processing, that AI development is bringing. And that's a major problem, because if you hear the case of Brazil, they have this data protection law, the LGPD, and after that they start discussing, in parallel, but after that they start seriously discussing AI regulation. We are doing the opposite. And that's a major issue when you're trying to understand all these topics, or all these elements involved when discussing AI in a coherent, structured way. And this, our AI policy was published in 2021. It wasn't, in that case, we were some kind of pioneers. It was developed by an expert committee, multidisciplinary expert committee. It was developed as a result of a participatory process. That's nice. We use a lot the word ethics, that's nice. It was in during, the 2018 probably. It was a nice word. But I think that right now it's not enough in order to deal with AI challenges. And I think that probably if you see this strategy, the first version, you will see a lot of different aspects that the government was trying to cover with this policy. They mention a lot, for example, the importance of data governance, access to data in order to develop AI. But they are not putting a lot of attention in developing good data protection framework when dealing with this kind of things, because, data protection, personal data is very important. Mixed data sets that contain personal data are very important when developing AI. But for some reason, we are not putting a lot of attention in that dimension of AI development. And of course, we use a lot the word ethics. And that is very intriguing because you know that Chile is famous because, probably most of you know this, because we recognize neural rights as fundamental rights like 2 years ago. Disclosure, I don't like that. It's very problematic. In that sense, I follow the views and approach of Professor Christoph Bublitz from University of Hamburg on neural rights. I'm a fan of the work of Professor Christoph Bublitz and very criticizing this approach. But I'm not going to deal with that right now because it's another different topic. But we are trying to address, well, we recognize as a fundamental right neural rights, but still we were not dealing with data governance, data protection properly when dealing with these new challenges that technology was bringing to us. But I want to be a complete critic of this Chilean approach because this approach has nice things. I mean, we're using this OECD definition of AI. I think it's okay. And we start developing some things. We create this a national center for AI that is pushing hard in order to develop research on AI. They developed a Latin American AI index. That's very interesting because they are trying to compare, the situation of different Latin American countries in order to understand the conditions for the proper development of AI. For example, this index was issued in 2023. I think that was the best version, and they realized that Chile is at the top of the Latin American country in terms of the elements that are necessary for developing AI, in terms of data infrastructure, advanced human capital, research, connectivity, among other different issues. In that sense, we're okay. Probably this index is a little bit biased because it was developed by a Chilean research center, but I think that the different factors they were considering are objective. And in that sense, Chile stands out as a real leader in terms of AI development. We are developing AI systems in health sector a lot. We are developing AI system for the public sector, for different kind of purposes, social security purposes, in education selection, and so on. That's nice because we have this vast baseline condition for that. But I think that still we have all these regulatory constraints that are not allowing us to develop properly AI issues and trying to tackle AI risks. But this is very interesting because last year Chile was working on an update of this AI strategy following UNESCO readiness assessment methodology. We were following these recommendations from UNESCO, and we update especially the pillar dealing with regulatory issues. That's nice. But the point is that, again, it's like, okay, we're using this UNESCO baseline in order to understand our system, but still we are not tackling, these data governance issues. And we are not considering that in some way we are some kind of pioneers in international world, international perspective in the development of principles dealing with AI. Chile signed in 2020 the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement with Singapore and New Zealand. Was a kind of pioneer agreement dealing with digital issues in international trade. And there is a special chapter, our Article 8.2, dealing with artificial intelligence issues. And this is one of the first international agreements dealing with these kind of things. And we even recognize some principles in order to deal with AI issues. We recognize the principles of explainability, transparency, fairness, and human-centered values. That's nice, I think. But we are not implementing these commitments contained in this free trade agreement internally, not yet. You know? Even though when you start this discussion, I remember when I participated in the discussion of I'm going to deal with this in a couple of minutes, but there was a discussion regarding AI draft law, and nobody knows about these commitments, and the Congress people there did have no idea about this. There is an international commitment, is eventually under the umbrella of the dispute settlement chapter contained in this free trade agreement, and nobody was taking care of this when developing AI regulations. Well, but it's good because, I mean, in this update of our national AI policy, we improve a lot of things. We recognize that international aspects are very important, that we need to be involved in the discussion in international fora of AI issues. But, for example, we do not participate in the Committee on AI in the Council of Europe. And a lot of Latin American countries were participating as observers, but Chile was not participating. And we want to be the top in the region regarding these topics. Well, why we are not participating in the Council of Europe? That is a little bit surprising for me. There is a lot of factors, obviously. We are not part, for example, of Convention 108, probably being part of Convention 108 facilitates everything, but you can make an effort at international level in order to be an actor, stakeholders in shaping the new rules that will, regulate AI in the future. And with this background, we need to understand that Chile was discussing, last year, started this discussion about data protection, AI laws. There was a first proposal from a group of Congress people that was based on the first text of the AI Act posed by the European Commission. Without considering all the discussion that took place after, after the publication of this first text by the European Commission, and it was a watered down kind of model of the AI Act, There it was, in that sense, very problematic. The approach to AI was very naive. They're just trying to select some topics, the risk-based approach, some issues related with responsibility, but they don't distinguish the different roles, that the different AI stakeholders usually have when dealing with AI systems. And more interesting, this draft law proposed the creation of an AI agency, a committee. And what is the most interesting provisions or powers of this new agency will be to authorize, before initiating the development, commercialization, distribution, and use of AI system within the Chilean territory of these systems, that is a little bit too much, I think. It's very naive. I don't know how they're going to do these kind of things. But fortunately, there was this year, in May this year, the Chilean executive, the Ministry of Science, presented a new bill and that contained a big improvement in terms of taking the most interesting and most important part of the AI Act. And they decided to propose some principles based on UNESCO recommendations on AI. That's very good. They were following the risk-based approach of the AI Act. And more interesting, they was creating a new, AI agency. But this is very curious. This AI agency will be the DPA. But we don't have a DPA because we don't have a data protection law. But it was considering a prognosis that probably this data protection law that is being discussed right now in the Chilean Congress, mirroring the GDPR, will be approved, and we will have a DPA. And this DPA will be in charge of the enforcement of this AI Act, And this is very interesting because I start talking to you, telling you about the importance of data governance. And at the end, Chilean government was recognizing the role, the importance of data governance when dealing with AI. That's the reason why, I'm assuming, they are giving these powers to the future Chilean DPA. But you can see that the Chilean approach is a little bit inconsistent. But I think it's a good track right now. We have this law. Still, we don't have a data protection law. That's bad. Even the bottleneck regarding our data protection law is precisely the agency. Is who is going to be the data protection agency. We don't have clarity about that, but still, this bill, AI draft bill, is giving these powers to the possible eventual data protection agency. That is very interesting. My final comment is that, again, probably we need to, AI strategies, roadmaps are good, but we need to have a coherent approach, structured, organic approach when dealing with these kind of things. Laws are very important. AI strategies are not enough. And we need to, and I think that international participation and commitment, assuming international commitments are very important when dealing with AI, because of course, who is developing AI? Who is developing generative AI systems or foundation models? It's the global north. And if we want to be participants of this discussion, we need to we need to be stakeholders, and we need to be involved in the discussions that are taking place at Council of Europe, eventually at OECD. I don't know, probably in the future we are going to see some discussions at the WTO level, I don't know. And it's very important to be part of these discussions and to have a clear strategy when dealing with these kind of things domestically and at the international level. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Pablo. I think you pointed out the issue of coherence with data governance framework. It's very important. But as you were speaking, also, I was wondering, like, what is that should go into a AI strategy? Because we are talking about many different things at the same time. So you're talking about AI issues that many of which can be addressed by data protection, but there's also issue about investment, you know, what sector you prioritize for AI development, whether you should have open source encouragement of the local ecosystem. You have this issue of coordination of different agencies, whether you have an AI authority or not. So there are several things, and I wonder, you know, thinking about the future, if we had to design from scratch, what goes into an AI strategy? You know, maybe there's some common issues here that we can put our fingers on and say, okay, this is what definitely needs to be part of an AI strategy. This is just a general reflection for the panel, but also as an invitation for everybody to raise issues which they think is important to address. One aspect also that was mentioned at the beginning that I didn't see in the latest intervention is the sandboxes. You know, sandboxes to generate AI applications that are in a contained environment and that allow to develop more scalable products. And here, I also wanted to ask a clarification to Beatriz, because you said, Beatriz, that you did not see an uptake of these AI sandboxes. They were local, municipal sandboxes, or at the federal level, was then done through legislation, or was it another type of initiative, maybe more like a guidance? Was it guidelines or was it a law? So this is also, I think, interesting for us to understand.
Yeah, so the example of the sandbox was, it's active. It's an initiative at the equivalent to the DPA agency. Colombia has a normal data protection law, and there's an agency that's in charge of competition, consumer law, and data protection. It's the same agency, and then within there's departments. So in that agency, which is an independent national agency, there was the initiative launched maybe 3 years ago to have sandboxes to develop AI applications in a controlled environment. So what a sandbox does in Colombia, and for those in the audience that don't know, is that it's a controlled environment that allows you to levy some legal requirements for a little bit to see what happens. And if it works, then you will get legal sanction to go forward. So in Colombia, there's a nice precedent of sandboxes in the financial sector where, for example, a company said, I'm capable of giving people loans without as much information as you are asking me to gather. That might be very important in an informal economy where you don't have good information about people's payments. So a company says, I can give loans without asking for that information. That's required by law. Let's do it in a sandbox. And if it works, you allow me to launch my business. That was sort of the spirit of the AI sandbox in Colombia in respect to data protection. I think one of the, I mean, I don't know exactly why it didn't work, why it hasn't worked. I think one of the challenges there, and I'm going to say something controversial maybe for the table and the conference, is that I think you can process data legally with a data protection law when you're launching an AI model. Like if you are asking for consent, or if you have a legitimate business basis. Like I don't think there's an issue. There's data protection concerns in AI development maybe, but I don't think developers felt that they had to go to the sandbox. And so I guess I think my general question there is that the thing that I feel is important in Colombia at least is a clear identification of the issue that we want to address with these initiatives. And I don't think the AI sandbox for data protection departed from a very crisp analysis of that. Like normal law kind of worked for a lot of that. And if it's the government has also a lot of power to process personal data without asking for consent. So I just don't think that the applications that exist had any need to go through it.
Now, what is perceived as more important, more like a bottleneck, is the copyright aspect. And so in Brazil, there is also a sandbox done by the Data Protection Authority in the concept of data protection, but also now in the AI bill, there is a provision that says in the future we'll develop a sandbox for copyright, particularly to determine how the remuneration of foundation models when they train their models with copyright data is going to be done. So maybe Bia can comment on this aspect of the bill.
Yeah, of course, I'm very happy to go, but can I just add kind of a parenthesis before that, picking up on something that Beatriz said about having...
Yeah. I just want to clarify that Beatriz is not at all a common name in Latin America. Like what you're seeing here is absolutely extraordinary, and especially in our generation. Like, anyways, sorry.
But just picking up on the point that you said about part of having an AI strategy is having a clear vision of what the objectives are, what was the direction that a country wants to go in direction towards. And I think one of the challenges that a Brazilian AI strategy has faced and has received quite a lot of criticism because of that is the lack of one vision. I think one of the challenges is that it tries to do too much at the same time. So it is a strategy that, again, based on the 5 principles of the OECD, but also with 3 diagonal transversal axes, which are a bit difficult to understand, but like legislation, governance, and international aspects, and then the 6 different vertical axis, and then like 73 strategic actions. And there's so much that it was proposing to do in terms of research, innovation, development, as well as conscious and ethical use. The main issue of the Brazilian strategy, and I think that answers part of Nicola's first question, is like, what do we want from a strategy? I think it requires, in a way, an exercise of prioritization that is not easy, but is fundamentally necessary so we can have one strategy and not only kind of a statement of principles or a statement of very general objectives. So what will be the path for implementation, what will be measures of successes, what will be key areas of priority or to focus. And I think the new version, kind of the revised version of Brazilian strategy tries to kind of amend some of these shortcomings by actually choosing some sectors like health, education, agriculture, I think, and energy as being the key new focuses of a strategy. So I think one hard challenge that countries, when development strategy needs to focus on is what are the priorities. It's great that we want to do lots of things, but it's very difficult to do so. So what could be things that we would want to achieve first. And again, now coming to the question about copyright and the Brazilian choice to include it in the legislation, I think that parts also from the understanding that the Brazilian copyright legislation has been outdated for quite a long time, and is almost kind of like a legal bypass, because there's so much political hurdles to overcome in terms of the, updating the Brazilian copyright legislation to be actually up for the new challenge that we're facing, that instead of doing that through the kind of more traditional copyright route, which I think other jurisdictions would choose to do, the AI, new version of the AI bill actually says we recognize that copyright is an issue in terms of innovation, but also cultural innovation and creation and fostering creativity. We don't want to AI to be have a chilling effect on artists producing content, because they don't want that content to be used to train the model. So that is what the Brazilian bill proposes is kind of an opt-out model. So artists and creators would have the option to opt out from their production, their creative outcomes to be used to train AI, and the kind of the more sticky issue of remuneration, so how the ones that opt in, or rather not opt out, could be remunerated from the training. I think that is still controversial, and that's when the kind of sandbox idea comes into place. So there would be a context where some different proposals or solutions could be tested in kind of a controlled environment, and perhaps that could be scaled up in the future. But it is in a way flagging this is an issue. We don't quite know the answer yet. We are going to keep looking for the answer. Perhaps in the future we'll have a better model for that.
All right. Unless Chile and Mexico have developments on sandboxes and copyright that we want to mention, I would open it up for questions, comments, that to join this conversation on AI strategy. You know, anything that you want to ask, or also contribute from your own perspective of what should go into this AI strategy. Let's start to think together what should go there and how it should be developed. Yes, microphone.
Thank you. Interesting conversation, discussions, congratulations. It's good to see how the landscape in different countries of Latin America looks like. I am Christos Velasco. I'm Associate Professor of Information Technology Law at the HBV in Mannheim University, Cooperative State University. My question to all of you, in your views, do you believe that the national AI strategies that have been developed in Latin America have sufficiently been discussed with the wide stakeholder community? Because we need to remember, here in Europe, it took more than 3 years to develop, you know, when the EU Commission initially proposed the EU AI Act, and then it went through the trialogues, and then there was like the AIDA committee that started, you know, opening the consultations. It was sort of a long-term process. Are we seeing sort of like a similar tendency? Yes, not, or what are your personal views specifically on those strategies that have been developed, for instance, in Brazil? And Chile, well, it's also going through the same path. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Ingrid Schneider from University of Hamburg. Thanks a lot for these insights and information on national strategies, but I would like to know a little bit more what triggered the discussion in your countries, because you very much referred to domestic strategies, domestic industry development, but I mean in Europe, we very much discuss it in terms of geopolitical dimensions. On the one hand, you've got this idea that we have to develop national innovation systems in AI, but also have to have a risk strategy in terms of shaping technological trajectories, but also very strongly to rein in the powers of big tech. And as far as I know, of course, all these GAFAM companies are also very active in Latin America. dominating the field. So is there a discussion? I mean, normally in Latin America, you have this anti-imperialist approach and notion in many fields against the US in a certain way. But is there a sentiment like that, or do you just accept it? And also in terms of, I heard that you had lots of references to the EU AI regulation. So is that something which is a reference just because it's there, but it needs a lot of regulatory capacity which may not be there? So isn't it better to have just these UNESCO recommendations, readiness reports, but also maybe Council of Europe recommendations, which are more based on principles, more loosely, but also maybe easier to implement than hundreds of pages of AI acts with annexes and all that, which just don't fit the regulatory capacity of a country, of a middle range economy in Latin America.
Thank you. And there's another one there. By the way, there. We love principles, but the problem is afterwards, the implementation. Yeah.
Okay, hi, hello everyone, thank you. Well, as you might have discovered, I'm from Latin America also. I'm from Uruguay. My name is Gonzalo Sosa, and I work for the Agency for Digital Government of Uruguay. And we are developing, if you let me, Nicolo, throw another Latin American country to this mixture, we are also developing a digital national artificial intelligence strategy alongside a data strategy, a national data strategy, and alongside a national cybersecurity strategy and a digital citizenship strategy. So all of these strategies, the objective is to have a whole picture that includes a lot of data governance issues, not only data protection. And we do have also 2 articles in a law that establishes that the Agency for Digital Government has the leadership on the development and deployment of these strategies, and also on the creation of regulatory sandboxes. But so we have a lot of commonalities, and I think that UNESCO and CAF influence is clear in Latin American countries. Perhaps my question would be if you think that the initiative to create a regional council on AI could be viable, and what are your thoughts on this one?
Okay, thank you very much. We have 3-4 minutes, so just telegraphic response if you can. Yes. Yeah, please.
Okay.
No, but we are the last session. So the next one is actually our colleagues from Brazil that are doing it online. So I think we have some flexibility, but please try to be short.
Well, Mexico doesn't have a published AI national strategy, as I said. But I regarding your question, I would say that it's interesting precisely that that conversation has been led by the industry, no? And as I've said, like in 2018, a bunch of companies, regarding if it's a multi-stakeholder approach, I don't think civil society has been involved enough. I think we have a deficit there. Hopefully there will be an open parliament. What I see is that the hands of the industry are definitely there. And I don't want to sound very radical, and I want to keep it short, but also this relates with your question regarding what is triggering this. And I think in the industry is triggering this. So we are talking about this because UNESCO and the OECD push this agenda. And I think it's maybe rechanneling the conversation in a really good way. We have now really strong, as I've said, ethical or fundamental rights. I wouldn't say that it goes all the way, but yeah, we need more civil society, of course. Why are we looking to the European Union, and can we talk about Brussels effect or not? I would say because the US is definitely not a reference, even if it's in terms of geographical proximity to, in terms of Mexico. the executive order by President Biden is definitely not the place you want to look at if you, I insist, are a country of users and adopters rather than developers. So that's why I think that our strategy is actually, one really important aspect of our strategy must be regulation and must be protective regulation. And I know, and I'm worried and I'm concerned. Now I'm ranting, sorry. So it's just, of course, we have a lack of institutional capacity. Of course, we don't have the beautiful background rules that the EU has, but still we need to be able to shape these technologies rather than just align our environment and our workforce, to them. Yeah.
Just two things. First, regarding this regional approach, I would say that not yet. We don't have a regional approach. But I think that we are going to start seeing these kind of approaches probably in free trade agreements. They start putting provisions there. I'm not completely sure, but that is possible. The next 5 years, probably, they start putting some chapters dealing with AI issues. I don't know if they are going to do this in the correct way or not, if they are going to, for example, incorporate source code provisions or stuff. I'm not completely sure, but they're going to start discussing these kind of things. And you need to remember that last year, the Ibero-American Network of Data Protection Authorities initiated these kind of actions against ChatGPT regarding violations on the data protection perspective when processing data and prompts and stuff. It's data scrapping and all these data protection problems that we usually have with generative AI systems. And we saw that in this case some kind of coordination, and that's the reason why I probably can project that probably in the future DPAs will probably assume some role as an AI authorities in some way. And regarding the influence of the AI Act, yes, Brussels effect, civil law, and because the people that is dealing with these issues from the legal side is the same people that is dealing with data issues. It's people that is discussing data protection law, they are taking GDPR, and obviously when they start discussing AI, they are going to take the AI Act. I think that that is a practical reason why we are seeing this strong influence from Europe in the digital sphere.
Okay, my turn super quickly. I think in Colombia, one of the challenges and the reason why this hasn't uptaken is because we haven't had a very good reason to start from the beginning. So we're just good students of international law, and people who were in the last government were close to the OECD. We had just been part of the OECD. So you can actually see profiles of people migrating from Paris to Bogota, who were also, CAF is based in Bogota. They left Venezuela a couple of years ago, so CAF was totally there implementing the ethical principles. But
Can you say what CAF is? Because I think we know.
CAF is like a regional development bank, the second largest in the region. And they've been leading this agenda for several years. But I think there hasn't been like a scandal that pushes us to take it seriously, and I think we haven't. What you're doing in Uruguay sounds very interesting. I don't think we've had that congruent approach to why this is important or how we're going to leverage AI in the country. And maybe one of the reasons why the strategy didn't stick is because civil society wasn't there. They were very upset about it. And so there was no one to stand up for it when the government changed.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm also going to be very quick. Is there sufficient participation of civil society? I would say no, but also I think there's a barrier, a technical barrier there in terms of involving civil society that I think we as an academic, as a community of practice need to make an effort to lower so people can actually engage from different perspectives in what is an AI strategy debate and what it entails and what's the direction that as a country want to go. In terms of the triggers, I think that I would resist the idea of a Brussels effect also in the context of Brazil in terms of an AI strategy, and it has, or even I think most relevantly, an AI regulation, because as I see, the domestic triggers have been very strong, and the signals, the fact that AI technology has been in use and has been undermining rights in a already very unequal country, and how those technologies tend to have a disproportional negative effect on the most vulnerable parts of the population, I think was one of the key concerns driving a strategy, and I don't think that was necessarily the same in Europe in other contexts. So I think that the internal domestic drivers were very important, but I also think that kind of the idea of developing an indigenous AI ecosystem is a nice one for a government to follow. So that's why one of the things that I mentioned, I think the kind of a parallel tracks between the two initiatives. So I'm going to stop here. Can you just think on the capacity point? I'm absolutely in favor of a regulation. I think that even with capacity issues, there's ways of prioritizing where to allocate resources, and one of the things the Brazilian bill proposes is to actually build on the existing agencies so that they have to allocate them powers, supervisory powers, that helps with the kind of system of regulation. So a different answer to the capacity issue, but I don't think that we should shy away from actually regulating and protecting the rights, as my colleague mentioned, the fact that we are users and adopters needs to be taken into consideration in developing things that go beyond principles.
Perfect. I think we have seen that Latin America is laboratory of experiments about AI strategies. There's different approaches, different ideas, different issues being discussed. Hopefully this conversation here is helping to improve this in the future. And I think that the part of participation is important. Maybe something that you mentioned just now, you could have like a platform for people to discuss, because as it was pointed out in the question, some of these maybe are developing very quickly. So I'm hoping that this conversation not only has taught us many things that are happening, but also stimulating us to be more proactive in promoting the development of an AI strategy. Yeah, the conversation continues, of course, but now there's cocktail waiting. So join me, please, in thanking the speakers. Thank you very much.